Lights, camera, Oscars. The Oscar ceremony is this weekend, and it is my least favorite night of the year. Yes, I'm a film critic, and that confession doesn't make any sense on paper, but in reality, who wants a 3+ hour lecture that doesn't have a lot of laughter, but it does have a lot of virtue signaling and hard left politics? To quote Alyssa Milano, sorry, not sorry. Except there's still something special about a Best Picture winner. Yeah, it's been diminished in recent years. I mean, I could point to some films that were good, but not great, like Moonlight, Nomadland, Parasite. Sorry, those are not great films. They're flawed. Still, a Best Picture Oscar winner does have some cultural cachet. Still. Just ask David Vining. The author and cultural critic spent months and months watching every Best Picture winner ever. And he ranked them on his website. Just go to it at davidmvining.wordpress.com. He also chatted with me a few days ago about the process, his cultural observations, and a whole lot more. It is the perfect time of year for an Oscar chat, no denying it, and David did not disappoint. Oh, and by the way, David has a new book out. It's called Corstae, and he'll share more about that fantasy novel in just a minute. David, welcome back to the show. You've done, to say it's a deep dive doesn't really fully express it. It's a deep, deep dive into all the Best Picture Oscar winners, and you've written about that. I'll have a link on the show notes as well. First of all, before we get into the meat of it, how long did that take? Because that seems like a gargantuan task.
Yeah, I didn't do it all at once. So I spread it over about the last year.
Oh, wow,
So
okay.
I would do 5, 10, maybe 15 at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd go off and I'd do something else.
Sure.
I'd go watch a bunch of other movies. I could not do it all at once because I would have been driven insane. So
you need some palate cleansers in between, maybe like a grindhouse movie or a horror movie, just to kind of
something like that. Yeah.
change the tone up a little bit. You know, in recent years, people, and I'm going to throw myself into that group, have been saying that the Best Picture winners, Moonlight, Green Book, things like that, they don't have that Oscar feel. Like, we're not going to be really celebrating them in 20, 30 years. They're not as classic as the best of the best. Having gone through this whole process, is that a fair assessment, or what? How would you describe it?
I don't know about the future. Maybe they will be. I'm not big fans of either of them. I think Moonlight's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Green Book, I find to kind of just milk a toast, and there's not a whole lot to it. But, you know, to go back all the way to the beginning and work your way through it. You know, you're seeing how, like, kind of this mystique around the Oscars formed because especially in the first couple of decades, you've got a bunch of movies that just did not age well at all.
Now, when you say that, you're not saying it's problematic per se. I'm assuming there are other reasons why the stories just don't connect with modern times.
Yeah, different mores and stuff don't concern me. I'm happy to take a movie as it is. It's just they're just generally not very good.
Yeah.
You know, so the first couple, so the first ceremony had actually 2 Best Picture winners, Wings and Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans. Both of those are wonderful. They're fun. They're big. They're just grand entertainments. They're very different. Wings is kind of more traditional Hollywood fun fare. Sunrise is kind of like the pinnacle of what silent film could do, just in terms of, you know, montage and minimal intertitles, that sort of thing. But then you get into the sound era and it just kind of falls apart. The first sound winner is the Broadway Melody, and it's one of the first musicals ever made, and it's terrible. It's unwatchable. Same thing goes with a couple years later with Cimarron, which is this big Western, and it's also just kind of, it's my least favorite Best Picture winner. It's just kind of an unwatchable mess. We're just like, nothing really seems to make sense or connect. But I bring these up because at the time, everyone seemed to love them. So when I say they aged poorly, I don't mean like, you know, they're racist or whatever. I mean, it's like at the time, everyone seemed to love them. And then here I am like 100 years later, and I'm saying, along with everyone else, these movies are terrible.
Well, it reminds me a little bit when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. I watched a lot of terrible TV. But because we didn't have cable back then, we didn't have HBO. I watched them and gobbled them up. And for audiences back then, there wasn't a ton of competition, and this was still a newish art form, especially with the advent of sound. I would imagine there's a new learning curve that went on as well. So this might have just been the best at the time, and maybe that was a pretty low bar.
It's I have seen a bunch. My favorite period of film is the transition from silent to sound. So I tend to watch a lot in that era.
Hmm.
And it's kind of funny because, this is slightly off topic, but when you go look at established filmmakers at that time, people who've been working for 10, 15 years, they have the worst trouble
Mm.
converting to sound. John Ford in his first sound movie actually gave direction during takes like you would during a silent
Uh-huh.
film. It's called The Black Watch, and it's kind of terrible. Um it's sort of okay. But on the other hand, the newer directors, someone like Howard Hawks, who'd only been making movies for like 4 or 5 years, they adapted to it very, very quickly. So that by 1930, they were making extremely well, you know, extremely cohesive pieces of sound filmmaking that were just really limited by
Mhm.
the technology that they had at the time.
In over the years, we've heard of Best Picture winners that weren't highly regarded. I guess Shakespeare in Love, Crash, was it Around the World in 80 Days? Do I have that right? Is one of the ones that they pinned as being less than spectacular. Were there any movies along this path that surprised you that were, this doesn't get a lot of love, but actually it is quite exceptional, or even vice versa?
Um, the kind of the I would focus going the negative route.
Hmm.
How Green Was My Valley. I love John Ford, but How Green Was My Valley has never really worked for me. A lot of people love it, but I find it just like a saccharine mess. And it's the year where movies like everyone brings up Citizen Kane,
Hmm.
but there's also The Little Foxes, which is one of William Wyler's best movies, The Maltese Falcon, Sergeant York, Suspicion. That's one of those where, it's just I don't get it,
Hmm.
and I've never gotten it, but everyone else seems to love it. That's one where I wouldn't say it's aged poorly. I would just say I don't get it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, One of the big surprises was You Can't Take It With You from 1938. It's a Frank Capra movie based on a very popular Broadway play. It's kind of a reaction to the financial disaster that was his previous film, which was The Lost Horizon. And so it's very safe for him, but it
Mhm.
works remarkably well. And I had never seen it before. It's just kind of one of those in the 30s that you just never really think about. And then I put it in for the first time and I said, this movie's wonderful. And then during one of my breaks in between Best Picture winners, I did all of Frank Capra's movies. So I watched it again. And so, it wasn't just the surprise of discovering something really nice the
Mhm.
first time, it really worked the second time. So I like to hold that one up. You Can't Take It With You as a really nice surprise from that time.
Given all the technology we have at our disposal, was it, I want to say easy, but very doable to find all these movies either via a streaming service or a rental service or anything like that? Did
Yep.
any struggle?
Yeah. It was that's one of the things I love about just modern technology is that the library is open
Hmm.
and it's very wide. It's very, very rare. I'm looking for an older movie that still has prints in existence that I can't find. And so when it came to the Best Picture winners, they were easily findable. Amazon is just kind of like the standard
Hmm.
streaming location for paid rentals. So that's always good. But a lot of the stuff, Warner Brothers has a lot of winners, so that stuff was on Max. Most of that stuff was on Max. But then at the same time, I own my personal physical collection is about 1,300 movies, and so I end up owning like 40
Hmm.
of these. Mostly newer ones,
Yeah.
but it's I had to do a little bit of digging. Sometimes you have to go through slightly unofficial channels. Um, like The Great Ziegfeld was kind of hard to find for a long time.
Hmm.
That's another one that's just not very good. But it's yeah, it's I had very little trouble finding the actual winners. When it came to the nominees that didn't win, I tried to watch a bunch of those as well because I just kind of wanted to have a strong grasp of, you know, what I might have done if I were an Academy voter at the time. So I tried to watch a bunch of the nominees. Those were a bit harder to find because no one really remembers, Lenny.
Hmm.
I mean, who remembers the Bob Fosse movie Lenny?
Yeah,
Or um, what else? That sort of thing.
gotcha. When we look at the recent winners, the knock against them is that, oh, great, they made about $7 million at the box office, and they're very artsy, and they're very elitist, and they're very inaccessible to the masses. And I'm just sort of that's been a common complaint. This year, I think Oppenheimer's going to win everything, and that made all the money. So I think that won't
Yeah.
won't apply this year round. But if where's the balance there? Because I don't think we want Barbie to win everything because I don't think it's a great movie. I don't think it's going to stand the test of time. And I think the
Yeah.
populism and the best picture shouldn't be one set. But
Well,
do you think that we're getting to a place where most best picture winners and nominees are seen by very, very few people? Because it seems like that's not a great solution either.
the current like nadir of that pattern is Coda
Hmm.
from 2 years ago. So it's a movie that made $2 million at the box office. Apple TV. Apple didn't even produce it; they bought it. It was an independent film that they just bought, and then they aggressively campaigned for it, and it won Best Picture. And because it's exclusively available on Apple TV Plus, very few people can actually see it. So it is just the either the nadir or the pinnacle, depending on how you look at it,
Sure.
of just the people in their enclaves, the industry in their enclaves, honoring things that have no cultural reach. And the irony is, when the Oscars were first started, Louis B. Mayer started them at MGM. He started the Academy as an anti-labor thing in order to provide negotiation between labor and management in order to prevent the formation of guilds, which obviously worked for a few decades. But the Oscars were about putting baubles on the talent so they would make movies that he liked.
Hmm.
And for the first decade or so, it was actually called Best Production, not Best Picture. And if you look at most of the winners, they are very large movies that made a lot of money.
Hmm.
So, things like Cimarron, I can sit here and I can slag on Cimarron all day about being a terrible movie. It was a very large production and it made a lot of money. So who are you rewarding? So the awards actually went to the studios, but they were actually really won by producers. And so you're rewarding a producer for making a big gamble and making a lot of money. Now that largely held. There were kind of changes in opinion, changes in behavior as you went along. Like for instance, It Happened One Night, another Frank Capra film, was a very small production that made a lot of money. Frank Capra was the first real campaigner for Oscars. He got really mad in 1931 when his movie Ladies of Leisure didn't get anything. And so he started aggressively campaigning until he became part of the board of governors. But mostly it kind of follows this pattern of big movies that made a lot of money. And the pinnacle of that is probably The Godfather in 73, number one movie of the year, incredibly well respected, gets the best picture win. And it's still incredibly well regarded. What changed was the 80s. The 80s was when Hollywood discovered franchising and merchandising. And that's where the split begins between Academy tastes and popular tastes. So, you look through the best picture winners of the 80s, it's like Terms of Endearment. It did eventually make over $100 million after its win. And so you can see, but before it had only made like 30.
Interesting.
So yeah, it was like number 30 in the list of best of box office winners from the year before the win. The number one was Ghostbusters, I believe. And the year it did win, the actual ceremony, it made $70 million. And it ended up being like seventh of the year.
And that's a real
So
Oscar bounce, by the way. We don't get that anymore.
that, yeah, the Oscar bounce was a real thing. And it was the Academy existing off of its past to kind of push audiences in the direction that the Academy wanted.
Hmm.
And so, again, these are always like, it's never the cleanest of lines, the cleanest of behaviors, because you do eventually get Titanic in the 90s and The Lord of the Rings in the early 2000s. But it's, you're looking, it became this sort of mid-grade entertainment. When Harvey Weinstein kind of took over, it became mid-grade uh, historical romances that kind of took over. But they were never huge box office winners, but they were also never box office duds.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
changing point was 2008 when The Dark Knight didn't get nominated. I don't say that because I'm a huge Dark Knight fan. I really love The Dark Knight, but my opinion of the movie is not important. It's that it was the number one movie of the year. It was a very large production. It made a lot of money. It is, you take away the comic book element, it's classic Oscar winning fare. I mean, it sounds weird to say that because when we think of classic Oscar winning fare, we think of like The Godfather, we think of Midnight Cowboy, something like that. But if you go all the way back, big productions that made a lot of money, it's The Dark Knight,
Mhm.
and the Academy didn't nominate it. And then the following year, the Academy, in a panic, changes the rules to where it's not 5 nominees a
Yeah,
year, it's upwards of 10 in the desperate hope that they start getting blockbusters nominated.
yeah, yeah.
And that worked because we are getting consistent blockbusters nominated, except no one thinks they'll win.
That's right. Well, Mad Max Fury Road, I believe, was nominated, and I think maybe Black
It
Panther as
was.
well. Top Gun Maverick. Uh, I could go on and on. I want to get to your new book too. Before we get to that, quick question, and probably a wildly unfair question. They put you in charge of the Oscar ceremony. What do you change?
I've actually thought about this. Just for the listeners, we didn't discuss this question before, but I have thought about this. The one thing I would do is I would ban campaigns, and I would ban it on the harshest of terms.
Yeah.
Like if a producer was caught campaigning, they're kicked out of the Academy, and the movie is ineligible for Oscars.
It
That
is,
sort of thing.
you're touching on a subject I think many people don't realize. You and I are film geeks, so we're into this, but it is massive. I mean, the headlines that come into my phone on Twitter, it is a nonstop, gosh, 3 months maybe of just chronic campaigning, interviews and pressing the flesh and doing this and doing that. It is gargantuan. And the money is out of this world, too. As a film critic, I get a lot of stuff during this time of the year. It's basically slowed down recently, but books and screenplays and bottles of wine and all this stuff. Come see my movie, think fondly of it, and it's amazing. So continue. I just want to jump in with that little anecdote.
Yeah, and that would be ultimately be it, because then it becomes the idea would be that the Academy voters would just have to discover the films on their own. And this would, they have their own taste. They can go see their own movies. They can be like Tim Robbins and the player and just go see Bicycle Thieves. You can just do that. That's fine. But most of these people are going to be just going, if they're going to the movies, they're going to be seeing the popular stuff, and they're not going to be having Apple shove messages down their throat of, I will, give you bottles of wine and everything if you just take this code for this Apple subscription and vote for Coda. It's, the bar for trying to get people to watch movies has decreased to such a level where I am even getting the occasional email from someone trying to like pimp out their movie saying, just go to this link and watch the movie. And I can't imagine what it's like if you're one of the 10,000 Academy voters, the kind of pressure you get from every single producer who, but it doesn't even make economic sense anymore. The box office bump, the best picture bump doesn't materialize anymore.
Yeah, I
It's
mean, it's
it's
great.
tens of millions of dollars
Mhm.
for something that's not going to come back. You're might as well just go to the local trophy store and get an imitation one made. It'll be a better investment.
Well, it's a great point, but I think there's a cultural cachet, certainly within the industry, within your peer group, that if you get a
Yeah,
nomination and or an award, it means
that's
something
true.
spectacular. But you are right there. I mean, from a bump point of view, listen, I always say that at the end of the day, the Oscars are one big advertisement for Hollywood/movies, and when
I
they
don't even think it's that.
well,
I
they don't
think it's
treat it
an
like that.
industry
Yeah.
awards. I think it's an industry award show. I wonder why I should care about the Academy's picks for Best Pictures when I don't care about the American Society for Quality's picks for Best Statistician of the Year.
Hmm.
I mean, Best Statistician of the Year probably has more effect on my life than Best Picture, but I don't care about the ASQ's
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a
picks.
cultural, I mean, for years and years, we did watch the show, we did care, we did root on movies X, Y, and Z. That is certainly fading. And, if we have this conversation in 10 years, it'll be fascinating to see how much has changed, because I think the culture is changing so rapidly in so many ways. But all right, well, let's get to your book. It's a follow-up to your last novel, Crystal Embers. It's called Corstae. It's coming March 1st. You can get it on Amazon. But fantasy adventure, fill in the blanks for us, because I mean, I love the fact that you're so steeped in movie lore, and I'm sure that a lot of that is able to translate to the written word.
Well, I certainly hope so. Yeah, so Corsair is the story of a small country. It's a high fantasy universe where this small country is suddenly engulfed in a much larger war. Um, as its neighbors try to take advantage of situations to, plunder this tiny, rich country for its wealth. And, the core three characters are the royal family, King James, Queen Sarah, and Prince Andrew, and it's how they kind of deal with the situation. It goes out into the field to watch the battle. It goes up into the skies to cast magic from the backs of dragons. It does seem a little like in response to Game of Thrones, even though Game of Thrones ended forever ago, but I wrote this forever ago. I don't know. I think it really works. I get a little teary. I've had to read it 10 times in the last few months because I have different rewriting things, and
Hmm.
I still get teary-eyed towards the end. I think it really works. And I'd hope more people can enjoy it.
As a storyteller, what moves you? What inspires you? It certainly doesn't sound political. It doesn't sound cultural directly. Is it something maybe you've enjoyed as a young person that you want to recapture that? What's your muse as an author?
I just love good stories. I try to write. Everything I watch and everything I read, I take as a lesson for myself about what to do or what not to do. Good movies and bad movies can equally teach me what to do.
Hmm.
Um, Same with good and bad books. I do read, by the way. Um, but
I don't know how you
the
have the time with all this movie. God bless you.
late night. But no, it's really just about, trying to tell character-based stories that interest me. I obviously have a political bent based on where I write, and
Mhm.
that's fine. It probably seeps into my writing to some degree, but I'm not like didactic in terms of, especially my consumption. Like for instance, I just finished watching all of the films of Pier Paolo Pasolini, the Italian Marxist, atheist, homosexual,
Mhm.
and I enjoyed quite a bit of it. Even though all of his movies are about how the bourgeois classes are terrible, I still enjoyed the films.
Yeah.
And so I can still pull lessons about how to tell stories from someone like Pasolini. Doesn't mean that I'm suddenly, yeah, trying to wave the red hammer and sickle or anything. It's like it doesn't influence me that way, but I'm just out there looking for good stories
Mhm.
to take in, and I kind of process them and recombine them into trying to tell a new story for the world.
Yeah, that's a great approach, and I like the fact. It reminded me a little bit of a critical drinker who I had on the show a few weeks ago, and he talked about being a critic and then also being a storyteller, and how those two worlds can actually build upon each other, which is, I think, the best possible way. But David, thank you for joining the show, and I hope you'll pick up his new book. It's called Corstae. It's available March 1st at Amazon.com, and also check out his work. He does Saturday evening movie threads at the great Ace of Spades website. If you're not reading Ace of Spades, what's wrong with you? It's my
Hmm.
favorite go-to site. Politics and culture. It's pugnacious. It's fun. It's edgy. It's everything you want a movie blog or a culture blog to be. And again, thanks so much. I wish I could talk more, but we'll reconvene, maybe even after the Oscars.
All right, sounds good.
That's it for this week's bonus episode. I hope you'll listen, like, subscribe, tell a friend, do all the things to keep this cast going. No pressure. Or Just have a great week. And if you must watch the Oscars this Sunday, please drink responsibly.